Welcome back to the Out and About Town Show on Chop FM 102.7. I'm your host, Brad Joseph. On the second half of the show, we feature Richard McLeod, who gives us a little bit of an insight historically into the town of Newmarket. And if I got all my information correct, Newmarket also did go under some sort of pandemic back in the day. Welcome to Out and About Town, Richard.
How you doing, Brad?
Pretty good, Richard. I was just talking to Michael D'Angela from the George Hotel, and we're just reminiscing what happened back in the 1800s, 1900s in Newmarket. But from your information, I see Newmarket did also go through a pandemic, much like we're going through now. Did they not?
Well, we've had quite a few. Newmarket, I liked Michael's comment about drinking the beer. It was safer than the water. Newmarket in the 1860s was renowned for being the center of typhoid. Of course, we've gone through quite a few issues here. It wasn't until we really got a decent water system here in Newmarket, thanks to Mayor Kane, that we stopped being sick all the time. But I think today you want to talk about the Spanish flu,
Yes.
which... I initially wrote an article about it, and I've also done live presentations and also videos on the topic. Reason I got interested in doing that was that I meet a lot of people in a day, and people would say to me, there's nothing like this current situation we're going. We've never experienced anything like this, and I thought, these people really need to understand that. While this is a horrible, horrible situation, the Spanish flu back in 1919 was even more horrible, and with much higher death rates. And because of the situation, because they really, truly did not have a clue what was happening to them, I think that I know that the panic locally was much higher. If you take a walk through the cemeteries, local cemeteries, and I do tours through the cemeteries, so I always point this out, there's whole clusters of tombstones from the period from 1919 to 1920. All of these people having passed due to the Spanish flu. So, it was a major, not only here in Newmarket, but around the world. I mean, people don't realize, how horrible it was around the world. Just to give you an idea, 1/3 of the world's population was infected by the Spanish flu in 1919. 1/3. That's an awful lot of people. 50% of those who were infected were aged between 20 and 40. So unlike the situation we have here, where it seems to predominantly be attacking the elderly, back then, 50% of the people who got it and who passed away were between 20 and 40, which is it's horrible to think about. And the other thing, which just I think absolutely amazes me, is that 3% of the world's population died.
That much of a percentage?
Yeah, 3%. If you want to talk about worldwide, you had about 50 million people who died worldwide. But of course, the people who got ill was just astronomical. It's funny, when I did the presentation, people said, "Well, yeah, but what about the Black Plague, which everybody takes to go to school?" But the interesting thing is that more people died in the 18 months of the Spanish flu than in 100 years of Black Plague, or from AIDS or anything else. So, part of it was, I'm sure you'll want to talk about it, but why this was so. But you have to remember, this was before the invention of antibiotics. People had no idea what it was. And right now, as the government keeps telling us, we have a 14-day, or we appear to have a 14-day period where they test you to make sure that you haven't got it, but you have to be isolated for 14 days. Back then, it was 3 days.
Wow.
You showed symptoms of it in 3 days, and this is from a article from the period. What they say is, if you are diagnosed on Monday and you are still alive on Thursday, you beat it.
Wow.
So your two choices were dying or getting better, and they had no clue why people got better. So
sort of run its course, right?
Well, what happened was that I guess what it was, no antibiotics. They had no way to treat people. All they could do is isolate you. And it's interesting because many of the things that we're doing now for this current version of the flu, we learned to do back then. Many of the techniques that the government has called upon to battle today's or the current flu, we learned back then. We found the things that worked. We found the things that didn't work. Our social health system really grew out of that period. There was nothing back then. What happened was that there was no communication between different cities, different provinces. Everybody was really on their own. So I think this is the reason why they had such massive loss of life.
Wow, and considering now, hopefully they're going to have a vaccine by the end of the year, but they're expecting some sort of a second wave to hit us. So I hope we're prepared for that second wave, if there is any kind of preparation that we can do.
Well, as I said, this one lasted for 18 months, and there was a second and a third wave. What had happened we have to keep in mind, just from an historical perspective, we were at the end of the World War I, so we had people coming back from from Europe. And I think this is one of the reasons why it was so bad at that time, was that, first of all, for those people who don't understand, people didn't travel back then. I mean, people pretty much stayed in their own area. So the fact that we had all these people who had, first of all, gone over to Europe to fight World War I, and then subsequently came home, you had the virus coming with them. Interesting thing that I discovered when I was doing the investigation was that the first diagnosed case of Spanish flu was actually in Kansas. And it was on a military base in Kansas. And which I think is kind of interesting. It was in the spring of 1918. And records show that the person that had it died. And they didn't do anything to quarantine the people. They didn't. In fact, and this is probably a story that most people over the last 3 or 4 months have been reading about, there was sort of a conspiracy, I guess you would say, in regards to the Spanish flu, in the sense that all the governments knew that it existed. All the governments knew that people were dying around the world, and everybody had decided that they wouldn't talk about it. You know, do you know the story of why it's called Spanish flu?
I'd like to know.
It's called Spanish flu because every other nation had gotten together and said that they would not discuss it. They would not tell their people. It would be a state secret, so to speak. The Spanish government, which was at that time, as you probably will remember from your history, was not involved in the war and was on the side of the fascists, decided that their people had a right to know. And so they were the first people to report this new flu, which was running rampant around the world. And hence it got the moniker, the Spanish flu, which I think is kind of interesting. So a lot of people think that it came from Spain, but it didn't. It's just that the Spanish government were the only ones that, you could say had the honesty, had the integrity to tell its people what was happening around them, because people could see that people were dying. It wasn't as if, this was a great secret. And of course, during the First World War, there were people dying on the fields because they had it, and and they weren't being treated. That was the thing; they didn't treat it, which I find absolutely amazing. But I guess they had nothing to treat it with.
Welcome to the Out and About Talent Show on Chop FM 102.7, the show that connects you to the community. I'm your host, Brad Joseph. On today's show, we feature a.k.a. the History Hound of Newmarket, Richard McLeod, and we're going to talk a little bit about Hurricane Hazel, how it affected not only Toronto, but all around the GTA area as well, and as well, fires and floods. We're really on an upbeat topic today. I'd like to welcome to the show Richard. Richard, how are you doing today?
How are you today?
Pretty good, Richard. We're just talking off mic about a lot of catastrophes that has hit Newmarket, and one of the major ones in 1954 was Hurricane Hazel. Tell listeners a little bit about Hurricane Hazel and how it had devastating effects on Newmarket.
Well, it wasn't just Newmarket, but since we're in Newmarket, we'll talk about Newmarket. Yeah, basically what had happened was that it started off as a sort of a run-of-the-mill hurricane, as they are wont to do, starting in the Caribbean, deep in the Caribbean. And there wasn't really anything unique about it in the beginning. It crossed into North America, in North Carolina. And specifically, it started about the 8th of October in the Caribbean. And the dates for us to remember are the 15th and 16th of October of 1954. That's when it hit here. To give you an idea of the fact that I don't think anybody really thought too much about it, was that if you woke up on the 15th of October, the front page of the Newmarket, or sorry, the Toronto Star, indicated that we could expect a little light rain, maybe a little bit windy, as the after effect of yet another Caribbean hurricane. And I guess people just went off to work expecting that sometime during the day they'd get a little bit of rain and it'd be a little windy. Well, as it turned out, that wasn't quite the way it was going to unfold. Essentially what happened was that the hurricane was calming down a little bit as it came in through, as I say, Northern Carolina and started up through the state of New York. For whatever reason, and I don't think anybody really knows even to this day, it decided to stop. And it stopped over Lake Ontario. And for those people who know anything about the hurricanes, the worst thing you can have is a large body of water, heat, and a stationary storm that's just sitting there. That's exactly what happened. It stopped on the American side and just sat there for a little while, gathering strength. So by the time it hit Toronto, it was more than just a few isolated showers and a little bit of wind. It was quite impressive. If you just give you some quick facts about it, just so that you understand how devastating it was. And this is from the American Weather Service, or you can still go on and get the information. When it first started in Toronto, they were recording 110 kilometer per hour winds. They recorded 11.23 inches of rain over a 48-hour period, and they figured that about 300 million tons of water fell.
300 million tons?
Yeah, fell on southern Ontario, and essentially what happened was that, and we'll talk about this hopefully a little bit, what happened was we were ill prepared. I mean, we had never seen anything like this.
What about the emergency response units, though? Wasn't there some sort of emergency response put in place for catastrophes such as tornadoes and floods?
Because we didn't get them, basically. And also, too, what happened was there was a great deal of, much like our previous topic when we talked about the Spanish flu, the government was ill prepared for any type of catastrophe. We had floods here, but nothing like Hurricane Hazel. And there was a great deal of territorial infighting between the different levels of government and even the different communities as to how best to prepare. So there was really no central authority. If you think back right now, if you want to build along the route of the old Holland River, they would be very specific where you could build, where you couldn't, and they'd keep you well away from the floodplain. And this is well known. But back then there was no such thing. Back then you could build right down to the water if you wanted. They didn't really do any planning, it doesn't appear at all, or very little planning. So when Hazel came along and things started flooding, they were just sort of left to decide what they were going to do to fix it after it was over. There was very little that they could do. When you take a look, and this is Toronto, but I think it's a good example. Raymore Port, which is in the western part of Toronto, 38 houses washed away. And as a result of Hurricane Hazel, it is now a huge park. There are no houses there. If you take a look at
my grandparents was telling me back in 54 there was a lot. I used to live in Weston, in the west end of the city, around Weston Road and the 401.
Right.
And there's a little street there called D Avenue that would run right into the Humber River. At the base of D Avenue was flat land, and then there was the Humber River. They said all the houses down there got wiped out. Everything. They could see houses floating down the lake, into the Lake Ontario. It was just devastating. And I thought, they were thinking even back then, how come the government didn't have any kind of response? And as you said, we weren't even prepared for nothing.
No, because we really had never had. I mean, we had floods before, and we talked a little bit off camera about that, but nothing like that. And what happened was it was sort of what you would call the perfect storm. First of all, even when it hit Toronto and started coming to the north, it moved very slowly. So it just sat there and just dumped rain. Second of all, and I know people alive today who weren't around then don't realize that the Holland River was a major waterway. It was wide. It carried a lot of water. And when you've got that kind of water flowing through a watershed that's not used to having that kind of water, I mean, I think locally they knew that they had an issue, but they never seemed to fix it. We knew this back in the early 1800s. We've got stories of the river flooding and devastation along the route. But what would happen as soon as it would all dry up, they'd build again. Now, part of it was that they wanted to try and harness the water for the mills and for whatever. So for that reason, I guess they were a little reticent about doing anything about controlling the water, because, of course, a good flow of water is good for business. But, in 54, essentially what happened was so much water fell, and they realized that the structures that they had were not adequate. I mean, if you take a look, and I've done many articles on not just Hurricane Hazel, but just the whole, I guess you'd say, lack of structure. In 1954, what they discovered was that they had fairly recently they had put in a new bridge, nice iron bridge, big iron bridge. And what they decided to do is they would build a huge embankment of earth around it to protect it. Well, of course, when the floods came, it took away all the earth. The earth then allowed the water around it. The water just picked up their nice bridge and carried it down to Queen Street and even further. So, if you take a look at for perspective, if you take a look at where the River Common is now, the entertainment center here in Newmarket, that was all underwater. But then again, that was all part of the Holland River. I mean, and the water's still there. That's what people don't understand. The water's still there. It's still underground.
And you also mentioned, too, we're talking with Michael from the George Hotel and Brewery a little while ago on the last interview, how at one time Newmarket didn't have any water that was safe to drink.
Correct. Well, it wasn't just Newmarket. Most places didn't. What happened was that, again, it's easy for us, now to look back and say, boy, these people were kind of a little bit slow. But people would quite often have a well dug next to their outhouse. And so Newmarket went through many, many years of seasons of bad disease, typhoid, this sort of thing, cholera.